What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Academy of Change. My mission is to help you completely transform your life, create lifelong change, and be able to strive towards the best version of yourself with this podcast. And we have a special episode, our first ever guest on the podcast. And I wouldn't choose anybody else. This person has really become one of my best friends here over this course of this year since we met doing a certification course a little bit earlier. We talk all the time. We bounce ideas off each other. We're both really obsessed with growth, transformation, change. And so I'm so excited to bring Gillian on today to discuss her own transformation and her own change and growth this year. Welcome, Gillian, to the Academy of Change.
Thank you, Alex. That was such a nice intro. I could cry.
You deserve it. It's been really good. Honestly, I'm so grateful that we met there in the mindset certification and that we've been able to develop just the relationship that we have this year so far, because it's hard. We've talked about this, but it's so hard to find people who are on the same path as you, right? And so I think that it's so nice that we have NCI and that we have the different events. We were able to meet in person at the last coaching con, and then we start to develop more of we voice message each other all the time and do all that. And so it's nice to bounce ideas off of somebody and be able to not distance ourselves from people who are on the same path, but just surround ourselves more with people that actually are.
Yeah, for sure. Just being around like-minded people, because it was difficult to find those kinds of people. So yeah, I'm forever grateful for NCI for bringing us together, because I'm so lucky to have you. So I totally feel the same about you too.
I appreciate it. And yeah, it's great. And I think it's tough. There's almost I've heard Ed Milet, I think, talk about this in my entrepreneur mentorship group that I'm in with him and Andy Frisella. And he talks about how there's these points in your career, if you're an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, you're somebody trying to grow in that area, there's going to be these no man's land points where you're you kind of don't really know what to do. And so for the longest time, I know as I was in that area where I was don't have anybody around me that I really relate to. And that's not to say that there's not amazing people around me, but it's just this is a lonely road that we're on, right? Trying to grow a business, trying to help people and change people's lives in that way. And so it's nice to kind of grow out of that no man's land and to find people like you and Nick and Matt and other amazing people that we talk with all the time at NCI, and just different people as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just lonely because of the fact that you just really outgrow so much of your inner circle that you're used to. So it's just trying to find those people. And then once I found, like you said, you guys and people from NCI, you don't feel like that anymore, because now you've met your people. It's just about growing into the person that you're trying to be and finding people who fit that with you now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of growth and transformation, it's been amazing just to kind of be on this journey with you to see the complete just transformation that you've made, and just how many shifts you made here over the course of this year. And so I'm really pumped to get into that side of things. I know if for anybody wanting to hear Gillian's story in general, if you go to Optimize You, which is my other podcast, she told her whole story of her health, fitness, her growth from, where she came as a child, some of the struggles she had, all the way to where she is now and becoming a coach, impacting lives, all of the amazing work she does there. Today, we're going in a different direction. So this is the Academy of Change. We're talking about transformation, growth. And like I said, I wouldn't have anybody else on, because you've made amazing strides. And I want to get down to the root of some of those just strides, what it's taken for you to make these changes, what kind of changes you made. And so I'd love if you just start by talking about this year for you and just the growth that you've been able to make so far.
Yeah, so this year has been insane. I would say that the past couple of months, I've probably experienced more change than I have in the past 2 years even. I'd say the biggest breaking point, I guess, for me to really experience this kind of change was honestly doing the NCI courses and meeting you, and then also going through my breakup and coming to the realization that okay, this is not working for me anymore. This is something that's really holding me back and preventing me from being my best self. And I think that's something where breakups are so hard. Everyone goes through them, but like to be so real with yourself instead of settling for something that's super comfortable and safe, and to really acknowledge like, okay, this isn't working for me. That was like the biggest pivot for me this year. So that way I could start to actually figure out, what am I doing? What path do I want to go on? And like, literally, who am I?
No, that's amazing. So like the breakup was like that, almost that first domino that fell for you that allowed you to start like digging more into yourself and your situation to start getting into a better place there.
Yeah, I think a lot of that relationship, I think I was lying to myself because I didn't want to let go of that person. And in turn, you know, that's you constantly like telling parts of yourself that they don't matter, that those thoughts aren't real, they don't exist. And that's how you slowly start to lose yourself in a relationship with someone else, is when you're constantly like not listening to or seeing the reality of the situation. I was looking for every which way and reason as to why my life wasn't going the way I wanted to, except for the relationship, right? Like I was being blind to it on purpose. I wanted to find a different reason as to why I felt the way I felt. And I just really wasn't being honest to myself. And your body will tell you whether you are ready or not at some point, with anxiety, with just feeling really down, feeling really stale. I just felt so stuck and like I wasn't growing. And I knew I had no option at some point.
Gotcha. So you're like in the situation where you finally became aware that like the relationship was one big reason why you weren't where you wanted to be, why you were almost like spinning your wheels, and why you weren't as happy as you think you could be.
Yeah, for sure. I think that when your mind is like constantly consumed with thoughts of what's going on with this relationship, or feeling like we should break up, but I want to stay with him, which like constantly, like that started to become all I could think about. Like when I first got into growth and content and social media and all of this stuff with coaching, my mindset was so absorbed by my business and making content, and that's all I could think about. And I was so happy. And then it slowly started to become, you know, kind of codependent emotionally on this person, and realizing like, okay, all I think about is like this relationship. All my energy is going here. And I slowly started to take away from the kind of efforts that I could put towards my own career and what I really wanted for myself, because everything was just about that relationship.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you kind of went from figuring out that you lost yourself in some capacity to, at this point now, like almost finding yourself or being on that path. Because then that can be tough, right? To really define if you found yourself or not. I don't know if that's a thing, but you know, that's what it kind of sounds like to me. Like, and what, you know, on top of that, like making, okay, you're aware like this relationship is not serving me anymore. It's not allowing me to grow and be the best version of myself. What after that, like, did you start doing to really get into a better place and a better relationship with yourself?
I guess to find yourself, I kind of think of it more so as like, you have to come back to yourself versus like actually find yourself. Like, I think it's a lot of like your inner child, or just, you know, the answers, you always do, but you have to stop fighting with yourself and just let yourself be honest with, deep down, how are you feeling, trusting your gut and your intuition. And I think that the next steps for me were, I needed to close the door and I needed to do no contact, because I'm someone who, if you let me, I will drag this out forever. So I needed to be like, I need to let go for real this time, cut him off. Like, no contact, I think, is the most effective way to actually get over someone. And also surrounding myself with a really good support system. And just really channeling into myself and figuring out, what do I want? I needed to pour all of that energy back into myself that I was giving to the relationship that really wasn't serving me anymore. And I needed to start to figure out, okay, what do I really want? Like, you talk all the time about picturing your vision. Like, what do you want for yourself? Like, your dream board, right? Your gratitude, all of that stuff, and really thinking about what is so important to me and what I want out of life. And I had to go chase that and implement that. And I needed to heal a lot of very deep wounds that I had realized were why I was attracted and attached to this person, so that I didn't repeat and make the same mistake moving forward.
Gotcha. Well, that's awesome that you went there. Like, I feel like most people never get to this point that they really feel like they can go back and like, it's so uncomfortable, right? Like, you figured this out over the course of the last few months. Like, it's so uncomfortable to go back into the past and to go back into trauma, which I kind of think of trauma as just like, there's such a wide array, right? Like, there's the things that happen to people that are just disgusting and so terrible. And then there's those things that we have happened to ourselves that we just draw conclusions from, right? I talked about somewhere. I don't know where I talked about. I talk about things in so many different areas at this point, but I talked about like I had a rejection. I viewed this as a rejection. So I actually, this is back in 6th grade, I believe, somewhere around that period of time, maybe even earlier, that like I had a crush on this girl. And I had my friends ask her out because I was just a scaredy cat, right? I was like, go ask her out for me, right? And then they went and did it, and she didn't know like who I was, which I personally think that it's just like my name. Like, everybody knew me as Wojo. I think they asked like, Alex, you know, do you want to go out with Alex or something like that, right? It's just, I don't know who that is. And so I was like, I viewed that as a rejection. Like, when I kind of went back into that, I was like, oh my gosh, like that makes a lot of sense. Like, that I didn't put myself out there in those kind of situations for a long time because I didn't want to get hurt like that was. I was like, oh, rejection doesn't feel good, right? Like, it's like, that sucks. And so I stopped doing that. And so like, it's so difficult to go back into those kind of situations. But what are some things that you've done to actually heal those like past traumas, past situations that you've run into?
Yeah, so I can totally relate to you. I think we've talked about many times about how we had that fear of like judgment and rejection. So it really was hard for me. What I had to do was really, so I'm in therapy, so I work with a therapist to help me. And I had to actually be like super real and honest with my therapist too, because therapy genuinely is what you make it. And if you're bringing a bunch of fluff, you're going to get a bunch of fluff back, right? So you have to be like, okay, this is how I feel. I don't understand it. Let's discuss it and let's talk about it. So that's kind of what I did with my therapist. And we would go way back into all of like my trauma and my own self-worth and why I was attracted to these kinds of people, and being really honest, because I think for a lot of it, I didn't want to believe that I was doing that, or I didn't want to believe that I was making decisions based off of this truth, right? And it scared me. It really scared me a lot. And I think that's the thing with therapy, is sometimes it just opens up things that are so scary or painful that it's very quick to like reject it and run away from it. So you have to be very open and okay with accepting this in order to move forward, because sometimes you're just not ready for it. And also number one thing that resonated deeper with me than anything else is this book that I put you on, No Bad Parts. And it's a specific type of therapy that it talks about, which is called like IFS, which is internal family systems. And it's basically like telling yourself like there's no bad parts of you. Every part of you is trying to protect you and trying to understand what all of these parts are doing and how they play a role in your life. So talking to myself, talking to these parts, it sounds a little bit weird, but when you actually do it, you start to really understand like, what did this part of me need that got neglected or got hurt or rejected at some point, that it's now acting in such a way that no longer serves me for where I am today. And that's been like my biggest help, I think.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know. I just started reading that book, and I think of it as like, for anybody out there. So like the parts thing for me, it doesn't fully like resonate with my mind, right? Like I kind of think of it almost as like a frozen piece of yourself in time. Like if you think about like the 11-year-old Alex on the day when he got rejected, like, or viewed that as a rejection, like that could be viewed in my mind. That's what I kind of see it as, like that part, right? Like that version. It's like he's stuck there, right? He's stuck in that, what he drew a conclusion as a rejection. And so like I've kind of framed it as that, as like the part, I guess some things I feel like just resonate with different people. So like that's kind of what resonates with me, but I think that's really huge to do that and be able to go back and be like, okay, like what I did personally as well is like I went back and I was like, okay, what were the moments in time that I like am triggered by, right? That I'm so scared to go back to. And I put them all together and I'm like, okay, like went back to each of those and I was like, why did I do this? Right? Like, why did I do this thing that I was doing in this situation? Oh, well, I did it because I wanted to look cool. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to fit in. That was a common theme for me, right? It was like, I did everything because I wanted to be accepted and I wanted to be a part of the group. And so like, that kind of led me down. Like every time I like would go back to a different thing, I was like, oh shit, well, I did this stupid thing because I wanted to be accepted and I want to be a part of the group, right? It's like, that's the common theme I was able to find. Was there any like common themes for you when you went back into, or I'm sure you're still doing, I think nobody ever stops this, right? It's that never ending work that's you're going to have different stuff come up, but like, what are some of the common themes for you that you found when you've gone back into some of these like different parts of yourself?
Yeah, I think we're pretty similar. So for me, a lot of my common themes were my self-worth. Like, I don't think I'm good enough, or I'm not pretty enough, or just not enough, period, right? In a bunch of different ways. Feeling like, no one loves me, or I'm not a lovable person, or I don't know how to love people. And a lot of it was just like a fear of being rejected and abandoned and a fear of people not liking me. So that's kind of like my common theme. So a lot of like very deep rooted like self-esteem issues is really what it came down to for me, because I was like that too. And like you were talking about, how you resonate with that frozen part of you. That is really relevant, because that is like what it is. It's about like finding these parts that will still come out today, but like going back to like the earliest or like most painful moment back in time and like reminding yourself like, hey, this isn't my reality anymore. I'm not an 11-year-old Alex. I don't need to fear this kind of rejection anymore. It doesn't serve me, right? And just kind of like talking to that part of yourself.
No, I think that's great. And like almost like peeling back the layers of it. Like not being afraid to ask like why, and like get down to the root. Because I think that's the big thing with what we do as coaches, where a lot of the stuff that people try out there with these different diets and stuff, they never really get down to the root of the actual problem, right? It's just a lot of band-aids. Like, oh, I'm going to take this fucking medication, or take this, or do this. And it's like, you're not even getting to what the struggle is. So like, I think that root cause stuff, it works really well here, where it's like, what was the root cause of this? Like why I feel like this? And gosh, it is uncomfortable though. It is uncomfortable, but it gets easier, right? Like it gets so much easier to do. And you talked about self-worth, which I think is a really just interesting thing that so many people struggle with. I would imagine most people struggle with this, like not feeling enough for various different reasons, right? Like people draw their own conclusions, which is what I think all this stuff is, right? It's just it's crazy. Like the human brain can almost have one thing happen to it, and then we draw the conclusion that everything is like that, right? It's like, oh, this one situation happened to me, and that's what everything is like, right? This is one thing, even though like when you look at the evidence of like all of those situations that are like that, like there's like one time that happened. Like it's just like there's one thing happened to me once, and then now I've been telling myself this story for years and years and years that has just gotten me into a rough spot. And so like when you talk about self-worth, like what have you done over the last few months to work on like your self-worth and growing that?
Yeah, so that's definitely something I'll always have to work on, I think, for sure. A lot of what I've been trying to pay attention to that we've talked about a little bit is just really trying to figure out all the different ways I've relied on external validation to make me feel good about myself, and to kind of like cut that off and really focus on how to validate myself. So some practices like that is like, right, like I would rely on even like sometimes like engagement on social media, like guys commenting on me or whatever, guys talking to me, like all these different things. And I'm just trying to like get rid of it, and like things that are so easy for you to have access to just to feel good for a minute or whatever it may be. And really, again, just like working on myself, like journaling, meditating, listening to podcasts about self-worth, listening to podcasts to make you realize that you are enough, and affirmations, right? It sounds so corny, but it really, like, when you really think about it and you're just like, okay, how can I validate myself? How can I tell myself I'm worthy? Going through this type of therapy and doing some of the practices in the book, like talking to my younger self and reminding it like, hey, it's okay now. Like, you know, I'm 24 years old. Like, I'm not this little girl that's scared anymore. Like, and really trying to heal that part of me that constantly felt like she wasn't worth it. And just constantly reminding myself, like, I am good as I am, while also letting myself be. Like, just let myself be without any care of what anyone else thinks. That's really, really big for me because I am such a people pleaser. I've always been someone who like morphed my personality into whatever I thought you wanted me to be, so you would like me. And I'm really trying to just let myself be who I am and who I want to be without caring if you reject me or not, and being okay with if you don't like me, which is really, really hard for me. But that is like the most beautiful thing, because there's so many parts of myself that I have rejected for so long because I didn't think people would like those parts of me. And those parts feel bad about themselves, right? Like, that makes me not feel good because I can't show up as my most authentic self because I'm too scared to. So really practicing my authenticity, you just feel good because you're being you. And it sounds like ridiculous, but when you struggle so much with your own self-worth and like your own confidence, like it's very hard to do. And it takes a lot of like active like practice of like, okay, I'm just going to be myself. And if you don't like me, like, that's fine. And I'll move on.
Weird question. What do you think, how did you find like who your authentic self is? And I ask that because I did the same thing, right? I share the same exact thing, people pleaser, wanted to do everything to be accepted, morph myself into what I thought other people liked or wanted me to be. And for the longest time, I struggled to figure out who that authentic self was. So it was like, well, where is that, right? Like, where is my authentic self? And so like, how did you figure that out?
It's just always there. I think it's nothing that you have to figure out. It's about just letting it out, just being you. Because for me, it would be more like, even a stupid example, like, what restaurant do we want to go to? And me being like, whatever you want, like, whatever, you know, and it's being like, no, like, I want to go here, or I actually don't want to do that. Or in saying no, not being afraid to say no to people, like, not being afraid to just say genuinely, like, ask yourself, how do you actually feel about this situation? Like, seriously. And being honest, let that self come out without you fearing like, oh, they're not going to like that answer, so I'm not going to say that, right? So it's literally in you, and you just have to let it out as if it's who you are when you're alone, right? Like, that's kind of your authentic self, is when no one else is around you. What would you do? Who would you be? What do you think is funny? What do you like, right? Like, what do you like when no one else has any opinion about what it is? Like, that is just your true authentic self.
I love that definition. Yeah, that's really good. And yeah, it's like the no resistance, right? Like, it can feel, if you feel like you have a lot of resistance with yourself. And like you said, I love that yes and no type thing. I think it can be great for people to define as well. Like, I think along the lines of that is like your value system, right? A lot of times we go away from our values. And that was a huge thing for me when I define my values and I define what's truly most important to me, which I know we've kind of talked about as well. It really cleared things up for me. It's like, oh, okay, like this, now I can truly like say yes and no to things and really be more authentic, because I know I don't think people take the time to do that, or it's like they just like, they go by the seat of other people's validations and opinions because they've never defined what they truly want. You know, they don't ever prioritize themselves, right? Which is so hard to do for most people, to really sit down and and be like, you know what, I'm going to be me and I'm going to just prioritize myself, which I've learned allows me to prioritize everybody else and be more present for everybody else as well. Was when I'm not prioritizing myself, I show up in a terrible way. I don't like how I feel on a regular basis. Feels like I'm not present with anybody, right? I'm always thinking about other things or thinking about what people are thinking about me. And so like, I relate heavily with that. I think that's really, really cool that you talk about. And that's a weird question, right? Like, but I think that there's a lot of people out there asking it because I didn't know that right away. It was like, what? I was like, for the first months of like trying to be like more authentic, I was like, well, who is my authentic self? Or like, who is that guy who I want to be, like who I want to show up as on a regular basis? And it took me a lot of trial and error and like meditation and defining and getting clear on different things in my past and in my future and what I want. And like once I got all that clarity and it's like, oh, what's most important to me? And I start to kind of get these things and I start to remind myself of it on a regular basis. Cause that's something I'll toss in there is that like, if you don't know, like you got to get clear on these things and it can be super duper uncomfortable. But once you do get clear on, you know, what you really want in this world, why you want it, what's really important to you, like your value system, it starts to, yourself starts to come out, but you want to remind yourself of those things on a regular basis. I look at a sheet of paper that has those things on it and you might think, Alex, you're crazy, but how do you remember, like if you haven't done it for a while, if you haven't been yourself for a while, like sometimes it's good, like the first thing in the day, be like, okay, yeah, this is how we're going to show up today, or have an intent for the day. Like this is my intent for the day. I want to show up and present for everything. I want to like, sometimes my intent is to like have the best, like move everybody forward that I come in contact with or talk with or have a client call with. And so those are some things that have worked for me. What other things just on like the self-worth and self-love, especially, because like I think that self-worth and self-love are still a little bit different. Like I know you've worked heavily on that as well, and like self-soothing yourself, because let's be real here, like this stuff is not, it's not always like you're gonna just be perfect right after you get into a better place. Like there's gonna be days where you don't feel good. And so like, how have you navigated those days that are like bad, you don't feel as good, you wake up, you're like, damn, like I just feel off today, right? And also, second question, how have you gotten to a better place with yourself when it comes to self-love?
So on the days I feel off, here's one thing about me too, is I very much relied on my boyfriends for emotional support and to be my self-soothing, or to self-soothe me, right? So, or self-soothe, I guess isn't the word, to comfort me. So, and I think I found so much comfort in my sadness, like a lot. So I've had to really get uncomfortable with choosing things that make me feel good. And that's like a mantra for me. I'm big on like the mantras too, right? Is like, do more of what feels good to you. Okay. Like, does sitting here sulking and crying feel good to me? No, probably not, right? So how can I productively work through this? And sometimes it might be crying and letting it out, but sometimes it's, you know, I put on a podcast that makes me move in the right direction and they talk about things that make me feel better instead of listening to sad music, right? So being really I guess selective of what you choose to absorb and how you choose to move through these feelings. And then also, like, I look at my vision board. I have a vision board. I look through my affirmations that I have on Pinterest and I read through them, and they just remind me, oh yeah, I feel good. Oh yeah, this is right. This is how I actually feel, right? Then like you have to envision like your higher self as well. And who do you want to be, right? If you're not there yet, who do you want to be? And you start to embody that and act like that and move like that, because that's what you want and that's where you're going, right? Who you were or what happened to you doesn't serve you anymore, right? So we have to start moving forward and working through some of that. And we need our past to understand ourselves, but we can't live there. So doing some things like that. And honestly, also like when I am sad, journaling a lot, doing the voice memo journaling and talking about how I feel, because I don't want to have to rely on other people. Like friends are great as a support system, but I really am practicing, since I relied so heavily on other people in the past, to like, how can I get myself through this without rejecting it so intensely? And that's one thing about me too, is I've always struggled with super high highs and super low lows. So for me, if I wake up in a bad mood, I am prone to panic and be like, I need to get rid of this. Like, I push my bad feelings away and I reject that part of me so heavily that it was just very counterproductive, and it just comes back screaming louder because I'm ignoring it and I'm pushing it away. So if I do feel some type of way sometimes, right, I do those things to get me through it and feel a little bit better. But sometimes really I need to sit down and be like, okay, like, how am I feeling? And this is where the IFS, like therapy and that kind of stuff, is really helpful in asking, how do I feel right now? What do I need? Why am I feeling this way? Again, right? Why? Always asking yourself why till you get to the root of it, and sitting there. And sometimes, like I said, you're gonna cry, and it's okay to cry. And it's like, I'm upset, I want to cry, and let yourself. I think because I was like, I don't want to cry, I don't resonate with that sad part of me, I hate that part of me, right? Just accepting it. And it's like, okay, I cried and it's done and we're good. And now I'm moving on, right? Instead of just being so mean to yourself. I think it's really embracing that part of you, and being like, okay, now productively, what can I do to help myself through it?
That's really good. And yeah, I think we have a lot of similarities with like this stuff. Like I literally, my thing was always alcohol, drugs, food, different stuff that I would grasp for when I didn't feel good, right? And I love that you just have certain tools that you go to that help you really get into a better place with your state, right? Help you change your state, or help you work through the emotions in a better serving way. Because I think a lot of people out there who are probably listening to this, or just really people in general, they have something they go to when they're stressed, when they're sad, like whatever's going on, right? And that is a slippery slope. Like it's so, and it's not to say like don't like badmouth yourself or like get frustrated if you have this happen. Like I still have this stuff happen, right? I'm sure, Gillian, you have these things happen where you grasp for other things. It's our natural state, right? And you talked about like almost having emotions, like your emotional home of like, you had the emotional home that you like to be in sadness because it just became almost like a recurring theme for you. But I think that it's just so cool that you have like journaling and different types of journaling and podcasts and different things. And I would just challenge everybody out there to find these things, try out these different tools. Meditation, the book that Gillian's talking about is called No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz, I believe. And so if you want to try that out, I've just started reading it. It's very, very great. A lot of good stuff in there. And there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. But if you have like go-to tools and you set those up for yourself, then you're going to really, and it's going to take reminding, right? There's going to be like step backs. There's going to be things that happen. But if you can like figure out what works for you, you can do some trial and error with different types of tools, journaling, meditation, going on a walk. You can use other people, but I think it's really beneficial to not use other people all the time because, like you said, like you don't want to rely. It's similar, I think, to like I don't want to compare them, but like to like alcohol, drugs, to food. Like if you always go to somebody, what if they're not there, right? What are you going to do then? Or like it's just tough to rely on other people too heavily. So I think that's amazing. And what I've been able to gather from this, right? I've known this, but just like self-awareness, you're extremely self-aware, right? Like you have a lot of self-awareness. You've talked about a lot of these things. What are some things that you have done? This is probably something you never have been asked before. What are some things you've done to develop more self-awareness? Because I don't think it's not something we generally just always have. And I know I haven't always had it either.
I'd like to say I've been a pretty self-aware person for the most part. Maybe not, I guess. I think a lot of it is really just that, like, that healing part of yourself, right? Because, okay, so here's really what it was. There were parts of me that I, A, didn't like, and B, there were parts of me where I would be like, why do I do this? Especially if I start to see a pattern with it, and I didn't like it about myself. So I was kind of like, why do I do this? Or if I was constantly, right, having these highs and these lows, and I couldn't understand what's wrong with me, like trying to really figure out where these feelings and emotions all stem from, these actions, and where they come from is how you start to build that self-awareness. And it really takes a lot of time and effort and therapy, or, you know, some sort of realization of being like, okay, we need to figure out and keep asking ourselves, why and where does this come from? Like, what comes up for you when you feel this kind of way, right? Like, what emotions are coming up for you? When was the earliest time that you felt that way? And getting to the root of the issue so I could start to have clarity for myself, because that was one of the biggest things I think for me is I constantly question and I'm so indecisive and I don't understand why I'm like this or doing it this way. And you need clarity, right? Like you always talk about clarity. I needed to understand why I did the things that I did so that I could be like, okay, that makes sense now. How can I fix it and how can I move on and how can I prevent this pattern from happening again?
So shed the light on what it is. Keep asking why, keep peeling back the layers. And from that, from like healing, from just being willing to try and heal, because it is a very, very difficult thing to do, you've been able to develop self-awareness.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also too is like, we talk sometimes about like hitting rock bottom, right? Before people make a change.
Yeah.
I think it's something where healing is just, it's something people put off. And you know, we use so many different outlets, like you were saying, like alcohol, drugs, different things, just to like numb it or not feel it or just not work with it. But it's like, at what point do you get sick of your own shit? Like, at what point does it become something where you're just like, I don't want to feel like this anymore? And I think that's what it was for me. In order to actually genuinely heal, I had to be like, I can't even do this anymore. Like, I need to make a change. And if that is like really like truly healing, then that's what I need to do to actually get what I actually want from life, right? Because if I keep doing the same things and the same patterns, and I keep getting sick of myself, and right, I'm not growing, I'm not changing, I'm never getting there, because how am I going to get there if I keep doing the same shit, right? You got to get sick of your shit and break that pattern.
I love it. It's so good. It's so good. Yeah, it's so you got in enough pain to where you're changed as well. Like you know, I talked about in the first episode of this, which will be released like when the day we're recording, it'll be released tomorrow. Awesome. which is exciting. This will come out whenever it comes out in a few weeks. This will come out when it comes out in a few weeks. But I was talking about how like I hit rock bottom, and you know, you hit a lot of pain to change. I don't know if you would say it was rock bottom or not, but there's obviously been resistance on the way. Like, how have you handled that resistance to just get to the point where you are right now?
How have I handled my resistance? I think that for me, it just constantly didn't feel good. Like, you know, and I'm really big on like, do more of what feels good for you. And like, that really resonates deep with me, because I'm like, okay, well, like, what feels good? And every time I would resist, like, right, like I would have, I guess, there's things that I do that I know aren't great for me every now and again. And I do it and I cave in, you know, once in a while. And afterwards, how do I feel? Probably not great, right? Like, you don't feel good. Like, you know, these things are just temporary fixes or temporary highs that don't actually move you in the right direction. They don't change anything. So it's like, okay, maybe I cave in a little bit here, but I feel like crap after. So I want to chase more of what feels good to me. I want to feel good. Like, that is what I care the most about over everything. Because if you don't feel good, you don't move in a better direction, right? You can't show up as your best self at all. Everything is harder because you feel like shit about yourself. You're just constantly tearing down your self-confidence and your self-worth, right? So you want to prove to yourself that you can do these things, that you're worth it, that you care about yourself. And a lot of it too was like, I want to take care of myself because I am worth it. I think that when you constantly go back to these patterns and things that don't serve you, you're constantly telling yourself, I'm not actually worth the change. I'm not actually worth getting better. I don't deserve better, right? And that's just not true.
You nailed it. Like I was going to say that as well, like where I think it was on Ed Mylett podcast with Jamie Kern Lima recently that we both listened to, and she was talking about, and this was like light bulb for me. I was like, oh shit, like because she was talking about self-sabotage, which is that constantly falling back into old patterns, which I've struggled with my whole life until recently. And she's like, it's because generally it comes down to you not thinking you're enough, which I was like, that is exactly it. Because we continue to do these things that we don't want to do, right? Like, and it comes down to like going back into what you're talking about, healing the past, really getting uncomfortable with all that stuff that you have to get uncomfortable with to move forward. And I think from what it sounds from you is like, okay, you got in enough pain, right? You're like, I need to change. I'm not growing. I'm not making any progress. Like, I love growth, right? And then that growth and almost just like kind of defining where you want to go a little bit more has allowed you to like surpass the resistance. Like it sounds like you really just got a lot of clarity in your life. You worked on healing yourself. You're healing your past and just really having tools in place that have allowed you to stay the course and deal with the tough days and the weeks that are going to come up throughout this process when we do create change. But lastly, kind of the last thing I'm curious about, obviously you're still working, right? I think we're always working to become better. Like I talk about the ever eluding best version of ourselves, that we can never reach it, right? Which is so cool, right? If that's the goal, like that's my ultimate goal, to become the best version of myself. And I know it's like a carrot that's like running away. It's like, oh fuck, come on. Like, it's like almost got it. And then you're kind of on to the next day and it's like, now it's the new, we kind of define it, we go back. What are some things that you are doing to maintain this? Because, we both fall back into our old patterns before, right? Like, what are some things that you do on a daily basis, weekly basis to be able to maintain what you're doing and continue to grow?
I think it's a lot of the same practices that just help me. It's rewiring your brain, right? It's creating new patterns, right? It takes what is it, 30 days to form a habit, 60 days, something like that. You just have to keep doing this stuff and creating structure, creating routine for yourself so that you keep doing it and you tell yourself a different narrative. You tell yourself a different story than what it wants to tell you, because that's what you're used to. And I think a lot of it too is surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals and distancing yourself from people that aren't necessarily bad people, but they don't really serve or align with you. So it's constantly asking yourself, like, does this align with me? Does this feel good to me? And adopting these patterns and these habits that help you and keeping up with them, right? Because how many people are like, yeah, I journaled, and then they don't ever pick it back up? Like, no, you have to figure out, how are you going to consistently journal? How are you can consistently find something that helps you so that you stay on course, right? And like you said, if you are dedicated to growth and you're dedicated to being that best version of yourself, then there's really no other option, right? Because we're all going to have a setback every now and again, but can you get yourself back up to where you keep going instead of letting that setback define you and then just stopping altogether?
I love it. It's so good. Like routines, having the tools, all this stuff is so beneficial, guys. You gotta, this is gold. So hopefully this helps. I honestly think that those tools and those routines are so key, and the trial and error of it. Because you talked about, journaling, oh, maybe what do you got to do to get yourself to journal? And I would even say, if you have so much resistance with journaling, maybe that's not the tool for you, right? I think that if there's so much resistance with something, it's probably not what you're meant to do. Slow down, take a step back, figure out where, it's so easy to rush and do stuff. And I know you've had to talk me off ledges before of just I'm constantly rushing. Wow, I kind of want to grow, blah, 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 all this stuff, just craziness. And that's the last month or so, I've really slowed down and just been okay. And I got to catch myself here and there, but it's crazy. When I've slowed down, just how much quicker stuff's actually moved, so, oh crap. I've gotten a lot more progress, and the creativity comes to me so much easier. I just have ideas that come to me left and right throughout the day. And I'm like, oh, this is great. This is great content. This is whatever. Oh, this is a great idea for this. all this stuff, but it's because I've slowed down. And also, to your point as well, the tools, I can't stress the tools enough, guys. Like this, like having tools that work for you is huge. Like I've had a lot of just days in here the last month or two anyway, when I've been in the best place possible for me that I've been in my life. There's been days where it's like I wake up and I'm like, this feels off, or I don't feel good, or whatever. And in the past, Alex would have ran to alcohol, drugs, gambling, different, a million different things, right? To make myself feel better, and really just to deal with what I considered like stress and emotions that I couldn't feel, which I don't think there's any bad emotions. Like we should feel them all, but we just got to have tools to try to maybe make those like days that aren't as good, shift them into better days, or just be able to manage those days. And so like for me, I finally developed tools around taking the step back. That's like my first tool, is like when I'm not feeling good, it's like taking a step back and like digging into what you were talking about, the why behind it. Like, why am I not feeling good? I had a day where I didn't feel right. Like this was like last week. And I was like, why do I not feel like myself today? And I figured out that it was because I didn't have like clarity, which it kind of comes back to, I didn't have clarity on the day. I was like, there were some things I wanted to do, but I couldn't do them until something else happened, right? That was out of my control. And so I figured that out. I was like, okay, well, this is out of my control, why I'm feeling this way. And so like that allowed me to shift and be like, okay, like let's just do what we can do. Let's control what we can. And then guess what happened? Like I got the information I needed and I was able to start doing it, and the day kind of shifted around. But in the past, I would have got that weird feeling. I wouldn't have dug into the why behind it and got awareness and gotten like clarity around why I was feeling that way and just all of the reasons behind it. And I would have probably gone to something else, like now food. Obviously I haven't drank in a long time, but, or done drugs, but food would have been my thing. I would have gone to that to make myself feel better. But so that's what I would say to anybody out there, just from my perspective, some things that worked for me. Take a step back, slow down when you start to feel a certain way, and then try to dig into that why, peel back those layers to figure out what the reason is. Because once you uncover the reason, it becomes a lot easier to like figure out a way to resolve it, or figure out a way to use one of your tools. Like, because it's, if you constantly just go right to the thing that's going to make you feel better, right, in the moment, but then make you feel guilty or shameful right after, then you're never going to really grow. And that's not to say that there's not going to be step backs, but if you can train yourself to step back, ask why, figure it out, and then have tools to go to that are going to help you feel, just like deal with that, or work through those, or meditate with it, or sit with silence and whatever, you're going to really be in a good spot.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And I think a lot of that too is like when you kind of like slow down and you're saying, right, you can't, if there's so much resistance, you can't force it. So you have to pick something that just works better for you. And even with like our emotions and things like that, it's just a feeling. So if you give your emotions so much power that you just, okay, that's how I feel, so I'm just going to adopt like, okay, I feel this way, right? It's really inviting logic in and action that makes sense to help move you through that. So you don't just let your emotion overpower you, because I didn't know how to control my emotions. And I always let them overwhelm me and overpower me. And it's really just about, like you were saying, trying to find like productive things to help move you through the emotional state that you're in, not to let it overwhelm and absorb you.
100%. And even like starting with like the fact that no emotions are bad, right? If you define that, then it's going to be easier to take a step back, right? But if you have emotions that you think are bad, it's like if you have foods that you think are bad, right? When you eat them, you're going to feel guilty. When you have bad emotions that you view as bad, you're going to probably feel guilty. You're going to feel like you shouldn't have them. When in reality, there's no bad emotions. There's just emotions. And so last question, what would you say, like, is your level of like happiness and fulfillment now? Like where do you feel like you're at now versus when you started on this journey?
I would say overall, I am a lot happier. I've been on a self-growth journey for so long, but as in, I guess, since I had such a setback with the relationship and the breakup, since the breakup, I would say like every day is just like a little bit better. And I do still have days where I battle with it, and I do get sad, obviously, right? It's just human. But overall, like in my actual body, like I feel like good on a regular basis. Like I feel normal. Like it was to the point where like in that state I was in towards the end of the relationship, I was genuinely like I had constant anxiety. I was constantly depressed, constantly was crying, and I felt like genuinely like there's something so wrong with me. Like am I crazy? Like what is going on? And now I just feel like a lot more zen, a lot more at peace like with myself. I'm a little bit impatient sometimes, but really overall, I think I just every day gets a little bit better. And that's the other thing too, is like I am healing not just myself and coming to all these realizations too, but like when you unpack that, it just brings up a lot of emotional stuff that is really hard and heavy sometimes. So I always say like I take it like day by day, week by week. Like I'm like, yes, I'm like a week further away from this situation, and I feel this much better. And I constantly think that I'm moving in a way that I will consistently keep feeling better and better because I keep just doing things that align with myself more. So I don't know if I can rate happiness, but I definitely feel like I'm where I need to be, and I just have to keep moving forward into that direction.
Well, I'm happy for you. I'm proud of you. You putting in a lot of work, like just so much work. Like I know on a daily basis to grow, to be able to heal, to be able to get in a better relationship with yourself. And so it's awesome to see it happening. And for anybody out there, I would say like it gets easier, right? Like as you go, I'm sure you've seen this, like it gets so much easier as you go and you develop these tools. And so never stop quitting, never stop growing. And if this was helpful for you, please, make sure to like, subscribe, rate us, share this with a friend. I feel like this is a really good one to share with somebody who's struggling to be able to get some good tactics and tools to really get into a better place with self-love, self-acceptance, self-belief, healing your past, all of these things. We're on this mission to help as many people as possible transform their lives, create that lasting change, and be able to really strive towards the best version of themselves without having to hit rock bottom and without having to have like just tons of resistance. So anything helps with the growth. And Gillian, honestly, thank you so much for joining me and being my first guest.
Of course. I'm so honored. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks, everybody. We'll be talking to you soon.